Alright, we have Star Trek II Distress Call, a choose your own adventure book from 1982. Captain's Log, Stardate 8001.4. The USS Enterprise, on routine patrol, has received a distress call from the vicinity of Verda 3, and we are responding as interplanetary law requires. Admiral James T. Kirk commanding. Mr. Spock. Yes, Captain? The lean, dark science officer turned towards the commander and raised his pointed eyebrows. What do we know about this Varda 3? Kirk asked, knowing that the Vulcan would have retrieved the information from the ship's computer once the distress call had been received. An Earth-type planet within 5 points of Terran norm, Spock said. It is believed to have once been the base for a race of space-traveling humanoids, now thought extinct. The call could only have come from an archaeological team from Luna University, who are conducting a dig there. Kirk frowned and rubbed his jaw. Pretty far out, aren't they? Not unusual for such research teams, Spock responded. Turn to page 2. Lieutenant Uhura, keep trying to raise them, Kirk said. Aye, sir, but their fading call indicated either power failure or, she hesitated, or interference. Kirk thumbed his command intercom. Lieutenant Commander Chekhov to the bridge. In a few moments, the elevator door hissed open and Pavel Chekhov walked quickly to Kirk's position. Gipton, he said briskly. Mr. Chekhov, prepare a team of 6 security men and medical assistants for Planet Fall-In. He looked at a clock. 2 hours. Kirk looked at Spock. Any precautions needed? Spock shook his head. No, Captain. At least none are indicated. His eyebrow went up. But I should point out that there must be some reason for the distress call. Kirk nodded and gestured at Chekhov. Go armed and alert, and keep in touch. Yes, Captain, the young officer replied. He turned briskly and strode to the elevator. He did not smile until the doors had closed behind him. Then a happy smile broke across his face. Action, he thought. My own command on an unknown planet. If you follow Chekhov directly to the surface of Varda 3, turn to page 3. Or, if you first reconnoiter the planet, turn to page 4. Let's do that. Let's reconnoiter the planet. Chekhov assembled a team of red-clad security men and a combat nurse, Narva Mokhtar, a slim and attractive medic from Liberia, United States of Africa, Earth. He hustled them aboard the shuttlecraft, and they soon dropped away from the orbiting Enterprise and began circling the planet. 2 small moons, reported Narva. Varda's gravity is 0.8 of Earth's, so we'll be a little light. The shuttlecraft spiraled closer to the surface as Chekhov watched through the telescopic sensors. Rather an arid planet, he said. Deserts with strips of green along the many oceans. Although they listened carefully, they heard no further messages on the interplanetary distress channel. We'll go lower and see if we can spot anything, Chekhov reported to the Enterprise bridge. There are intermittent life-form readings in Sector 12 West, Mr. Spock told the landing party by radio. Aye, sir, we'll investigate. The shuttlecraft flew in low over the bleak hills of the western desert, then came upon the green coastal strip. Narva pointed out the overgrown ruins of some kind of ancient structures ahead, and the shuttle was set down in a clearing. Continue on opposite page. The security men leaped from the ship and immediately set up a defensive perimeter, their phasers at the ready, leaving 2 men to guard the vessel. Chekhov took 4 men and Narva toward the low buildings they saw ahead. The jungle around them was different from anything Chekhov had seen before. The plants were like soft cactus, built to soak up and retain all the moisture they could. There were short, fat tendril-like plants that moved sluggishly, weaving toward the Terran intruders. The landing party broke through the jungle into an area that had been cleared by phasers and saw before them a partially unearthed archaeological site. Nearby was a cluster of inflated domes and the usual tools and necessities of an archaeological dig. But before them was a series of star-shaped buildings, tier rising upon tier, made of shaped stone, and with the entrance at each inner joining of the triangular sections. But before them was a series of star-shaped buildings, tier rising upon tier, made of shaped stone, and with an entrance at each inner joining of the triangular sections. Narva held up her tricorder so that Chekhov could read it. Some kind of life-form readings in that building, she pointed out. Chekhov nodded and flipped open his communicator to report in. If you go directly into the star-shaped buildings. Turn to page 8. If you decide to investigate further before entering, go to page 10. Let's investigate a bit more. I'm feeling we play this on the safe side today. Lieutenant Commander Chekhov led his team along the side of the ancient star-shaped building. They noted the small insects and odd little flowers, suspicious of anything, as it was proper on a totally new planet. You never know your friends or your enemies on new planets, Dr. McCoy had told them. Sir, Narva Mokhtar said, pointing to another entrance into the structure. All right, Chekhov said. With 2 ways in, we can hope that there are 2 ways out. They entered the building cautiously, stepping over pieces of broken rock and flashing their lights along the dark, silent corridors. The passage took a turning, and they were out of sight of the rectangle of light that marked the exit. Chekhov put in a call to the bridge of the Enterprise. We have seen nothing yet, Captain, he said. We are. On the bridge, they heard his yell of surprise, and then the sounds of frightened men, and then silence. Chekhov! Lieutenant Commander Uhura said sharply. Come in, please. She made several more attempts, then looked at Admiral Kirk. We've lost contact, sir. Continue on opposite page. There is something in the stone of the buildings, Captain, Spock said. Without a specific guiding beam, we can't focus, and therefore cannot beam them up safely. Kirk slapped his armchair controls. Security, 2 teams, fully armed, to the transporter room immediately. Mr. Spock, you'll take your own team down. Mr. Sulu, you have the con. Kirk all but leapt towards the elevator door, which hissed open before him. If you follow Mr. Spock and his team to the surface of Varda 3, go to page 16. If you follow Admiral Kirk, go to page 17. Let's follow Spock. Page 16. The transporter beam set down Kirk and Spock's team a short distance apart, and Spock immediately took his team toward this far entrance, leaving Admiral Kirk to take the closest. Spock ordered old phasers set to stun, and then plunged quickly into the excavated entrance to the immense cluster of ancient star-shaped buildings. Spock kept his eye on Lieutenant Lex Nakashima, a brilliant young computer expert of Japanese-American descent. This was his first alien planetfall. And far different from his formerly sheltered life surrounded by massive computer banks. The stone passage was dark. Their lights flashed along its length, revealing only dust at first, then the skeleton of some kind of creature. Spock paused next to it, noting the decayed shreds of clothing and the moldering remains of a weapons belt. A Thrix, I believe, Spock said. Fascinating. They have been extinct for centuries. He motioned down the corridor. Continue, Lieutenant. Proceed to page 34. Nakashima put his phaser in his other hand, then wiped his wet palm on his uniform before transferring it back. He peered into the dimness of the corridor ahead, trying to make believe this was some kind of elaborate game simulation where all the senses were involved, but he couldn't quite do that. It was too real, too harsh, with too many possibilities around each turning of the corridor. Am I afraid? He wondered. Of course I'm afraid. Any sensible entity should be afraid, but that does not mean I'm ready to panic. He remembered something Mr. Spock had said. Whenever fear drives you to panic, remember that that is the worst possible time to panic. Think of the options. What do we fear most? Nakashima thought. The unknown, of course. Our own imagination works against us. The young officer grinned, but the familiar never excited anyone like the unknown, he thought. He moved ahead into the unknown. To follow Lieutenant Nakashima more closely, go to page 53. To stay at Spock's heels, proceed to page 54. I'm pretty invested in this Nakashima's character arc, so let's follow him. Page 53. Lieutenant Nakashima was the first to see them. He sent out a shout and started to run ahead, then abruptly stopped. Ahead of him were the 9 scientists they sought, lying as if dead in the stone passageway. But where was Mr. Chekhov? What had downed the archaeologists? Very good, Mr. Nakashima, Spock said at his shoulder. Proceed cautiously and logically. Nakashima started forward, flanked by two security men, their phasers ready in their hands, expecting anything. What they didn't expect was the bodies of the scientists to disappear in a blink. There 1 second, reading strongly on Spock's tricorder, then gone. The dials dropped to 0. Fascinating, Spock murmured. No slow transporter beam scan, no molecular displacement apparent. And the scientists had been there, giving weak but positive tricorder readings. Teleportation? Spock wondered. Then blink. Something was there. Then blink. Something was there. Something terrible. Proceed to 71. A monster filled the passageway, scaled and steaming, all teeth and claws, its many eyes gleaming in their lights. Instinctively, one of the security men fired, but the stun beam had no effect. The creature took a step towards them, its claws scraping on the stone, its massive jaw swinging open, giving them far too much of a look at rows of teeth and a maw of pulsating red meat. The security man thumbed his weapon to kill and fired again. Then again, another one of the red-jacketed men fired as well. The great beast only quivered and advanced on them, jaws dripping, eyes bulging, long, sharp tail whipping back and forth. Spock ordered the men to stop firing in a sharp command, then stepped before them. Mr. Spock, Nakashima cried out and grabbed at his arm, but Spock shook him off and advanced slowly, his phaser in its holster and his hand out in the ancient Vulcan gesture of friendship. He's mad, exclaimed Nakashima, gasping. Then his mind clicked over to a new line of possibilities. The Vulcan never did anything without a reason, he knew. Nakashima prepared to back up the actions of his commander, but it made him very nervous. Go to page 116. Spock's hand reached out toward the scaly head of the many-toothed monster. The wet-looking eyes followed him. The creature's tail whisked back and forth viciously, but it made no other move. The Vulcan's hand touched the armored scale. My mind to your mind, Spock murmured. My thoughts to your thoughts. Then he screamed. The security men brought up their weapons, but Spock held up a hand. He had fallen to his knees, but his hand was still in contact with the hideous creature. Spelled creature. No, he said. The Vulcan got shakily to his feet and stood there for a long moment, then stepped back. The creature lifted a clawed arm, then vanished. Nakashima blinked. Sir, what? The 9 archaeologists popped into view with a soft poof of displaced air. They groaned, and Spock ordered them beamed up at once. He turned to the still staring young lieutenant. Mr. Nakashima, your evaluation. Sir, what you did, I performed the logical action, Mr. Nakashima. I contacted the opposition. What you saw was the last living Varden, or Las Fapan in their language. It is old and dying. The scientists were pets. I persuaded the creature to release them, but there is a task for you, Lieutenant. Nakashima raised his eyebrows. You will bring down a molecular transceiver, then transfer all non-classified material in the ship's library. But why, sir? The Las Fapan likes to read, Lieutenant, don't you? Be certain that you include the greatest of Vulcan books, the Dune Par Tak Nor. I think you would especially like that. I always did. Yes, sir, Nakashima said. Oh, and the rules for that ancient Terran game, Dungeons and Dragons. I think it might be appropriate. And there we have it. That's Spock. What a great guy. What's kind of curious is that none of the stories follow the plot line of Star Trek 2. I think this is just a marketing gimmick to sell a choose your own adventure book with a Star Trek theme. Somebody bought this for $1.95 40 years ago, and I bought it at a garage sale 5 or so years ago. Alright. Thank you for going on this little journey with me.